At my sister's wedding, my parents kicked me out of my house and handed me only a suitcase in front of 300 guests. The suitcase hit the marble floor of the Grand Bellevue Hotel ballroom with a sound I will never forget. It wasn't loud, not really. The string quartet in the corner was playing something soft and French, the kind of music my mother had spent 14 months arguing with the wedding planner about. And 300 guests were still murmuring to each other in that polished, self-satisfied way that people do when they've been given champagne before noon. But I heard it. I heard the corner of the hard-shell Samsonite clip the marble, and I heard the small collective intake of breath from the guests nearest to us, and I heard my mother's heels click 3 sharp steps toward me as she closed the distance between us like she was finishing a sentence she'd been composing for years. And then I heard the slap. Her palm connected with my left cheek so hard that the world tilted. I went down, not gracefully, not in the way people fall in movies, but sideways, one knee hitting the marble, my hand shooting out to catch myself against one of the white-draped cocktail tables. A champagne flute teetered. Someone gasped. I heard my sister's voice from somewhere across the room. Not Vivian, stop! Not what are you doing? But something closer to delight, quickly swallowed. A single musical note of satisfaction she'd been saving for exactly this moment. 300 people watched me fall. I stayed down for exactly 2 seconds. I counted them because counting was the only thing that kept me from making a sound. 1, 2. Then I stood up. My cheek was burning. My knee was bleeding through the silk of my blush-pink dress, the dress my mother had chosen for me, incidentally. The one she'd said made me look appropriate rather than attention-seeking, as if the entire architecture of my life for 34 years had been designed around not taking up too much space. I stood up straight. I smoothed the front of the dress with both hands. I looked at my mother. Vivian Ashford Cole was 61 years old, and she had never once in her life looked anything less than composed. She was composed now. Her blonde silver hair was pinned in the style her colorist flew in from Paris twice a year to maintain. Her cream-colored mother-of-the-bride suit was Chanel. Her earrings, my grandmother's earrings, the ones I'd been promised at 17, were the pale gold of old money. She looked at me the way she'd always looked at me, like I was a problem she hadn't quite solved yet. "You are no longer welcome in this house," she said. Her voice was quiet, conversational. The guests nearest to us heard every word because the string quartet had stopped playing. "Or in this family. Your father and I have discussed it. This is done, Ilara. We're done." My father, Richard Ashford Cole, stood 3 feet behind her. He was looking at the floor. "Your things have been packed." She gestured to the suitcase. "Security will escort you out." I looked at the suitcase. I recognized it. It was mine, the one I'd bought myself in my 20s with my first real paycheck. My dark green canvas with a small red tag I'd tied to the handle so I could find it on baggage carousels. They'd packed 34 years of me into a single carry-on. They hadn't even used a large case. 300 people were absolutely perfectly silent. My sister Celeste stood 20 feet away, luminous in her cathedral-length Vera Wang gown, her new husband Daniel's hand hovering uncertainly at her elbow. She was 29, 5 years younger than me, and she was watching me with an expression I recognized from childhood. The look she got when something she'd planned had finally come together exactly right. I understood in that moment that this had been planned. The timing, cocktail hour, before the seated dinner, when the maximum number of people were assembled and mobile and watching, had not been an accident. The packed suitcase, carried in by a hotel staff member, I could see his embarrassed face now at the edge of the room, had not been a spontaneous gesture. This was choreographed. My sister had choreographed it, and my mother had agreed, and my father had looked at the floor. 300 people waited to see what I would do. I reached into my clutch purse. It was a small thing, silver mesh, also chosen by my mother, containing almost nothing. My phone, a lip balm, my driver's license. And one other thing. a card I had carried for 11 years without ever using it, that I had almost thrown away a dozen times, that I had kept for reasons I couldn't fully articulate until this exact moment. My fingers closed around it. It was a simple card, matte silver, heavier than a business card because it was made of brushed titanium. On one side, in clean engraved letters, Hawthorne and Associates, Private Estate Management, a phone number. And beneath that, in my grandmother's handwriting, actual handwriting, I pressed into the metal with a pen she'd held so hard you could feel the intention of it. 2 words, for emergencies. My grandmother Eleanor Ashford had pressed this card into my palm on the day she died. Or rather, the day before. She'd been lucid in that last window, the way people sometimes are, and she'd called me to her bedside in the white room that smelled of roses and antiseptic, and she'd said, "Ilara, I need you to keep this. Don't use it casually. But if a day comes when they try to take everything from you, call that number. Robert will answer. Tell him Eleanor's girl is ready." I was 23. I hadn't known what she meant. I'd assumed it was the morphine. I knew now. I looked at my mother. I looked at my sister. I looked at my father, who still hadn't raised his eyes. Then I bent down, picked up my suitcase, and walked out of the Grand Bellevue Hotel ballroom without a single word. The string quartet started playing again before I reached the door. If you need to hear what was on that card, keep listening, because what happened in the next 30 minutes changed everything. You need to understand my grandmother. Eleanor Harriet Ashford was born in 1934 in a farmhouse in northern Vermont, the third of 5 children, to parents who owned 40 acres of rocky soil and the kind of stubbornness that gets mistaken for dignity. She put herself through secretarial school. She moved to Boston at 22. She met my grandfather, Thomas Ashford, at a company Christmas party where she was the secretary and he was junior counsel at a law firm, and within 6 months, she had reorganized his entire filing system, identified 3 billing irregularities that were quietly costing the firm money, and become indispensable to him in ways that had nothing to do with romance. The romance came later, and was secondary. I and my grandmother would have been the first to tell you so. Thomas Ashford became a very successful attorney. Eleanor became the person who ran everything Thomas touched without ever having her name on a single document. This was 1958. This was how it worked. She didn't complain about it, at least not in ways that left a record. What she did instead was learn. She learned everything about the law, about estate management, about trust structures and asset protection, and the specific, elegant mechanisms by which money could be moved, protected, multiplied, and preserved across generations in ways that tax authorities found legal but inconvenient. She became, over the course of 40 years, possibly the most knowledgeable person in the family about exactly how much money the family had and where it lived. My grandfather died in 1991, when my mother was 26. Thomas left everything to Vivian and her younger brother Charles in equal shares, or so everyone believed. What he actually left, it turned out, was a partial estate. A very large portion of the Ashford wealth had been moved legally and quietly into a separate trust structure over the preceding decade. My grandmother had done this, not to defraud anyone, to protect it. Because Eleanor Ashford had watched her daughter's personality calcify into something hard and acquisitive by the mid-1980s, had watched Vivian marry a pleasant but spineless man named Richard Cole and immediately begin managing him like a portfolio, and had made a decision that the family's real wealth, the original Ashford capital, grown over 60 years into something substantial, needed a different kind of stewardship. She chose me, not because I was the oldest grandchild. Celeste was born first. Not because I was particularly impressive or exceptional. I was a quiet child who liked books and math and spent too much time alone. She chose me because of a single moment when I was 9 years old. My grandfather had just died. The family had gathered at the Ashford house on the Cape for the reading of the will, and afterward, when the adults were arguing and my mother's voice had climbed 3 registers and my Uncle Charles was turning red, I had gone quietly to the kitchen. I found my grandmother sitting at the table alone with a cup of tea and sat down beside her without being asked. She'd looked at me for a long time. "Do you know what they're fighting about?" she'd asked. "Money," I'd said. "They always fight about money." "What do you think about that?" I'd thought about it. I was 9. "I think it's embarrassing," I'd said, "to fight about money in front of the people who work here. The housekeeper is in the next room. She can hear everything. And she's sad too because grandfather died and no one has said anything to her." My grandmother had put her hand over mine. She hadn't said anything, but her eyes, gray, sharp, always evaluating, had done something they didn't usually do. They'd softened. She'd been watching me ever since. By the time I was a teenager, she was teaching me, though not in any formal way. She'd have me sit with her while she went through papers. She'd ask me what I noticed. She'd explain things once, without repeating herself, and check later whether I'd retained it. She gave me books, not children's books, but actual estate law texts, tax codes, biographies of financiers. She paid for my economics degree and then my accounting certification without telling my parents she was doing it, letting them believe the scholarships I'd won were covering everything. "Your mother believes money is for spending beautifully," she told me once, when I was in college. "Your uncle believes it's for status. Neither of them is wrong, exactly. But money that is only spent or displayed eventually runs out. Money that is understood, that is tended, that is respected, grows, and it protects the people who are patient enough to understand it." She died on a Thursday morning in October, 11 years ago. I was with her. My mother was not. She'd had a charity luncheon she considered unmissable and had planned to come in the evening. My sister was in Ibiza. My father had been there the day before. It was just Eleanor and me in the white room with the roses. She gave me the card in the morning. By afternoon, she was gone. I called the number once, 2 days after the funeral, just to confirm it was real. A man answered on the second ring. "Hawthorne and Associates." His voice was calm and careful. I said, "My name is Alara Ashford Cole. I'm Eleanor Ashford's granddaughter." He said, "Yes, Ms. Ashford Cole. We've been expecting your call eventually. Is this an emergency?" I'd said no. He'd said, "When you're ready, call again. Everything is in place." I hadn't asked what everything meant. I'd hung up and filed the card in my wallet and tried to forget it existed, because the alternative, understanding what my grandmother had left me and what that meant for my relationship with my family, had felt too large to hold. For 11 years, I carried the card. For 11 years. I watched my mother manage the family's social capital like a chess player, positioning Celeste for the right marriage, the right connections, the right visibility, while positioning me as the dependable background figure, the one who handled logistics, who drove people to airports, who organized the catering for parties and accepted thanks with a smile and did not ask for credit. I had my own life, my own apartment, my own accounting practice that had quietly grown into something real. But I kept showing up to family events. I kept being useful. I kept telling myself that this was what families did: accommodated each other, absorbed the inconveniences, held their tongues. I had swallowed so much for so long that I'd almost forgotten I was doing it, until a suitcase hit a marble floor in front of 300 people, until my mother's hand connected with my cheek, until I stood up and felt something shift, some long compressed thing find its shape at last. And I reached into my purse and felt the weight of that small silver card and finally understood what my grandmother had given me. Not just money, not just protection. A moment, the right moment, which only works when you're ready. I was ready. Outside the Grand Bellevue, the March air was cold enough to feel like intention. The doorman, a young man in a navy uniform who had clearly heard something because his eyes kept sliding toward me and away, held the door without comment. I walked through it. I wheeled my green suitcase to the edge of the hotel's covered entrance, set it down, and stood for a moment on the pale granite steps looking at the street. My cheek still burned. I put my hand to it briefly. The skin was hot, raised along the ridge of the bone. My knee had stopped bleeding, but the silk was stained. I looked perfectly composed, I thought, for someone whose family had just publicly disowned her. 34 years of training for dignity in difficult moments had finally paid off in the most specific and ironic way possible. I took the card out of my purse. Hawthorne and Associates, for emergencies. I dialed. It rang once. Hawthorne and Associates. The same voice. 11 years older. Exactly the same cadence. "This is Alara Ashford Cole," I said. "Eleanor's girl is ready." A pause. 3 seconds. Precise. "Ms. Ashford Cole." The warmth in his voice was quiet and real. "We've been prepared for some time. Are you safe?" "I'm outside the Grand Bellevue Hotel. My mother just struck me in front of 300 guests, and the family has formally disinherited me from their personal estate. I'm standing on the pavement with a suitcase." Another pause. Shorter. "Can you come to us now? Our offices are 12 minutes from Bellevue by car. I'll have a driver there in 4 minutes. There are some things you need to see tonight." "What things?" "Ms. Ashford Cole, Ilara. Your grandmother left you a significant estate. The value at current assessment is approximately $1.2 billion. There are also documents that will be of immediate relevance to the events you've just described. We should speak in person." I was very quiet for a moment. 4 minutes? I said. 4 minutes. I looked back at the hotel doors. Through the glass, very distantly, I could see the white glow of the ballroom, the movement of guests, the pale gleam of my sister's dress. "I'll be here," I said. The car was black, quiet, and unremarkable. The driver said nothing except good evening. We moved through the city's early evening traffic, the amber light of March at 6 o'clock, the city beginning to exhale after the workday. And I sat in the back with my suitcase beside me and my hands folded in my lap, and I breathed. I breathed carefully and deliberately, the way I'd learned to breathe in the years when breathing was sometimes all I had. And I thought about my grandmother. "Eleanor, what did you do?" The offices of Hawthorne and Associates were in a narrow Victorian building on Marlborough Street, 4 floors of dark brick and tall windows that looked from the outside like a private residence, and from the inside like a library that had decided to become a law firm. The reception was warm, actual warmth. Tea from a fireplace in the corner, with 2 leather chairs and a Persian rug and the smell of old paper and Earl Grey. A woman in her 50s with reading glasses and efficient posture met me at the door and took my coat without being asked and said, "Mr. Hawthorne is ready. Can I get you anything? Tea, water?" "Tea," I said. "Please." Robert Hawthorne was 70 years old, white-haired, compact, and precise in the way of someone who had spent a career dealing with large sums of money and high-stakes situations, and had learned that precision is a form of kindness. He was sitting behind a desk that was almost entirely clear, with a single manila folder and a glass of water in front of him. He stood when I entered, extended his hand, and looked at my cheek. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "Tell me about the estate," I said. He sat. I sat. He opened the folder. "Your grandmother established the Ashford Family Preservation Trust in 1989, he began. "It was structured as an irrevocable generation-skipping trust under Section 2642 of the Internal Revenue Code, with specific provisions designed to protect the principal assets from the decisions and the creditors of any single generation. The trust was funded over the following decade with the core Ashford capital, real estate holdings in 4 states, equity positions in 7 private companies, a portfolio of municipal bonds, and a cash reserve that has grown at approximately 6.4% annually since the trust's founding." He paused. "The named beneficiary, sole beneficiary, is you." I looked at him. "Your grandmother chose you in 1999, he said. "She formally amended the trust documents in 2002 when you were 10, after observing you for 3 years. She noted in the amendment that she had made the decision based on what she described as demonstrated temperament, intellectual capacity, and the kind of moral clarity that money tends to either reveal or destroy. She believed, in her words, that you had the second kind of character." "The other members of my family," I said carefully, "do they know this exists?" "No." His voice was unhesitating. Your grandmother was meticulous about this. The trust was established through a separate legal entity with no ties to the family's known advisors. The only people who have known of its existence are myself, my associate, and the trust's accountant, all of whom are bound by absolute confidentiality provisions. Your grandmother's instruction was that the trust was not to be disclosed to any family member other than you, and only at the appropriate moment, which she defined as either your 35th birthday or a moment of formal family crisis, whichever came first. He looked at me. Your 35th birthday, he said, is in 8 days. I sat with that for a moment. What are the documents you mentioned? I asked. The ones relevant to tonight. He reached into the folder and produced a second set of papers, these clipped together. Your grandmother was thorough, he said. Over the years, she became aware of certain irregularities in how your parents managed the family's known estate, the portion that your grandfather left openly to your mother and your Uncle Charles. She documented these irregularities. At her instruction, we engaged a forensic accountant in 2015 to conduct a formal audit of the family's known holdings. He placed the papers on the desk between us. What we found was significant. Your mother and father have been systematically misrepresenting the value of the family estate to your Uncle Charles and his children for the past 16 years. They have redirected funds from what should have been a shared inheritance pool into accounts held solely in your mother's name. The shortfall, the amount that should have gone to your uncle's branch of the family, is approximately $11 million. I stared at the papers. There's more, he said. When your grandmother died, there was a personal property distribution, jewelry, furniture, artwork. Your mother submitted documentation to the estate attorney claiming that your grandmother had expressed wishes about the distribution of certain items. We have your grandmother's actual handwritten instructions. I notarized and held with us, which contradict your mother's version on 6 specific points, including the earrings. The gold earrings. My grandmother's earrings. That my mother was wearing right now in a Chanel suit at my sister's wedding. She told me those were meant for you, Robert Hawthorne said quietly. She wrote it down. She was very clear. I sat back in my chair. Outside, the city moved past the tall windows. Taxis, pedestrians, the ordinary life of a March evening. Inside, I felt something happening in my chest. Not anger exactly, though anger was part of it. Something more like architecture, like rooms being unlocked in sequence, each one revealing the next, light spreading through a house that had been shut up for a very long time. What do I need to do? I asked. Tonight? He folded his hands. Nothing. Let the wedding continue. The documents are already prepared. The trust documentation, the forensic audit, your grandmother's handwritten instructions. All of it is certified, notarized, and ready. I can make one call that puts everything in motion. One call, I said. One call. He paused. But Alara, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer. What do you want the outcome to be? Your grandmother was very specific that this should be your decision. She never wanted this used for cruelty. She wanted it used for truth. Those aren't always the same thing. I thought about my grandmother's face in the white room. I thought about what she'd said. Money that is understood protects the people who are patient enough to understand it. I don't want them destroyed, I said. I want the truth to be visible. I want the people they've wronged, my Uncle Charles, his family, to get what's owed to them. And I want there to be a record, a legal record, that can't be undone or rewritten or managed into something polite. I paused. My mother spent my entire life telling me the story of who I was. I want to be the one who chooses the ending. Robert Hawthorne looked at me for a moment. Your grandmother, he said, would be very proud. He picked up the phone. Pause. Think about this. There are 300 guests still at that reception right now. I keep listening, because what happens when I walk back through those doors with Robert Hawthorne changes every single thing. We arrived back at the Grand Bellevue 41 minutes after I had left. I had changed. Not my dress. There was no time for that, and besides, The stained silk felt like evidence I wanted to keep. But I had washed my face in the bathroom of the Hawthorne offices and retouched the small amount of makeup I'd worn, and my hair was still pinned correctly. The cheek was still faintly red, still slightly swollen. I had decided not to cover it. Robert Hawthorne walked beside me. He was 70 years old, and he walked like a man who had never rushed anywhere in his life and never needed to. He was carrying a slim leather briefcase. He was wearing a dark gray suit that I recognized, without being able to name the designer, as belonging to a tax bracket my mother would have clocked immediately. The hotel's grand entrance was still active. Valets, moving cars, late guests arriving, the murmur of a reception in full movement beyond the glass. The same doorman in the navy uniform held the door. He saw me and his eyes widened slightly. The woman who had left with a suitcase, returning with a composed older gentleman and without the suitcase. We walked in. The ballroom was in full reception mode. The string quartet had been replaced by a 5-piece band playing something warm and jazzy. Tables were set for dinner. Servers moved between guests with canapes and champagne. My sister and her husband Daniel were at the far end of the room near the head table, Celeste's dress enormous and luminous, her laugh carrying across the space with the particular projection of someone who has been told their whole life that their voice deserves to fill rooms. The room was not silent when I entered. It was occupied, humming with conversation and music, and the particular energy of 280 people who have had several glasses of champagne and are enjoying themselves. But there was a moment. It moved through the room like a wave, table to table, conversation by conversation, when people saw me, when people saw who was with me. I watched it happen. I watched the ripple of recognition move from the guests nearest the door inward and across, watched the conversation begin to falter in pockets, watched heads turn. I didn't stop walking. Robert walked beside me, perfectly calm, and I had my hand loosely on his arm the way you might walk with a trusted advisor, or an old friend, or the person who has just shown you that the world is not what you were told it was. My mother saw me from across the room. I watched her see me. I watched the sequence. Surprise, then relief. She'd expected me to be gone, to have done what she'd always expected me to do, disappear quietly. Then, as her eyes moved from my face to the man beside me, something else. Something I had rarely seen on my mother's face in 34 years. Recognition. And beneath recognition, fear. Because Vivian Ashford Cole had been 11 years old when her mother began working with Robert Hawthorne. She had met him briefly at a handful of family functions over the years. She had never known what he did for Eleanor. Specifically, my grandmother had been careful about that, but she knew what he represented. She had always known, with the instinct of a woman who tracked social currency obsessively, that Robert Hawthorne's presence in Eleanor's life meant something significant. And she had always known, somewhere beneath the certainty she performed so well, that her mother had loved Alara differently. She crossed the room toward me. I watched her come. She was still composed. She was always composed. But there was a quality to her movement now that I hadn't seen before, a contained urgency, like a woman trying to put out a fire calmly. Alara. Her voice was measured, pleasant even for the guests nearby. I'm surprised to see you've returned, and... Her eyes moved to Robert. Mr. Hawthorne. Vivian, he said. He didn't extend his hand. He simply stood. I didn't realize you were in contact with our family's advisors, she said to me. It was meant to sound casual. It didn't. He's not your family's advisor, I said. My voice was steady. I was calm in the way that had taken me 34 years to learn. Not the calmness of suppression, but the calmness of someone who knows exactly where they're standing. He was grandmother's. He's mine. My mother's eyes moved between us. Perhaps, Robert said, we should find somewhere private to speak. I have some documents that require your attention this evening, Vivian. Brace and Richards. He looked past her to where my father had appeared, drawn over, I assumed, by some signal in my mother's body language. There are some matters relating to the Ashford estate that have come to light. My mother's jaw tightened. This, she said, is not the appropriate moment. With respect, Robert said pleasantly, the appropriate moment was perhaps before you struck your daughter in front of 300 people and presented her with a packed suitcase. We've arrived at a different kind of moment now, but yes, I think somewhere private would be best for the initial conversation. A couple nearby, friends of my parents, I recognized them vaguely, the Hendersons or the Harrisons, someone from the club, was watching us with unconcealed interest. My mother clocked this. She always clocked it. The library, she said, crisp, controlled. 3rd floor. Excellent, Robert said. I'll need you to contact your brother Charles as well. He should be present. My mother's face, for just a moment, showed something raw and unmanaged. Then it closed again. Charles is in the building, she said. He came for the wedding. Of course he had. Of course Charles was here, the uncle who had been quietly managed for 16 years, who had been given a partial picture of the family's finances and accepted it because he trusted his sister, and she was very convincing. Charles, who had grown increasingly stressed in recent years about his own finances, who had told me once over coffee that he felt like he'd done something wrong with money, that his share of the family estate had never felt quite right, but he couldn't explain why. Charles, who deserved to know. Good, Robert said. Shall we? There were 6 of us in the hotel library on the 3rd floor. Myself, my parents, my Uncle Charles, Robert Hawthorne, and his associate. A sharp young woman named Priya, who had been waiting outside the ballroom and who carried a second briefcase with the calm efficiency of someone who had done this exact thing before. The library was small and warm, with dark shelving and a round table that seated 8. A fire in the grate. The sounds of the wedding below were muffled but present. The band, the laughter, the ordinary joy of a celebration that had no idea what was happening 3 floors above it. My Uncle Charles came in looking puzzled. He was 64, my mother's younger brother, a softer version of the Ashford features, less sharp, more concerned, habitually apologetic in his posture, the way people get when they've spent years feeling like they're taking up too much space. He saw me and his eyes went immediately to my cheek. Alara, he started. I'm all right, I said. Sit down, Uncle Charles. There's something you need to hear. Robert Hawthorne opened his briefcase with the unhurried precision of a surgeon. He placed documents on the table in a sequence that was clearly practiced. The trust documents first, then the forensic audit, then the certified copy of my grandmother's handwritten instructions about the personal property. He explained, clearly and without drama, what each document represented. He explained the Ashford Family Preservation Trust. He explained that it had been established in 1989, that it had never been part of the estate my grandfather left openly, that its current value was approximately $1.2 billion, and that its sole beneficiary was me. My mother made a sound, not a word, just a sound, high and controlled and almost nothing, a sound like a thread being pulled tight. Robert explained the forensic audit, the $11 million, the redirected funds, the 16 years. I and my Uncle Charles sat very still. Vivian, he said after a moment. His voice was almost gentle, which was worse than if he'd been angry. Viv, is this? The figures are incorrect, my mother said. She was looking at Robert, not her brother. You're working from incomplete information. This is a mischaracterization of... The figures, Robert said calmly, were compiled by a forensic accounting firm with no relationship to any party in this room. The methodology is documented on pages 42 through 67. The findings have been reviewed and certified. He paused. Vivian, I have been doing this work for 51 years. I am not making an error. Silence. My mother looked at my father. He looked at the table. And these? Robert placed the handwritten instructions in front of Charles. These are Eleanor's instructions regarding the personal property distribution, written in her hand, notarized. I held with me for 11 years. He pointed to a line near the top. This refers to the earrings your mother specifically wished to go to Alara. You'll note your mother's signature and the notary stamp. Charles read. His hand was shaking slightly by the time he looked up. She's wearing them, he said. He meant Vivian. Yes, I said. Vivian Ashford Cole sat in that library chair in her Chanel suit and her stolen earrings, and for the first time in my life I watched her not know what to do. Not perform composure, not manage the room, simply not know. Her face moved through something complicated and unresolved, and she didn't catch it in time, didn't smooth it away before we all saw it. My father cleared his throat. What happens now? That, Robert said, is substantially up to Alara and Charles. He looked at me. I looked at my uncle. He was still reading the page with the earrings. His shoulders had a quality I recognized from difficult moments in my own life. That specific set of the body that happens when you realize you've been deceived by someone you loved, that the grief and the anger arrive together and are briefly indistinguishable. Uncle Charles, I said. He looked up. I'm not doing this to destroy the family, I said. I need you to know that. But I am doing this because you deserve to know the truth. And because grandmother chose this. And I think she was right to choose it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly. What's the process? He asked Robert. It was the question of a man deciding to act. We'll begin with a formal letter to your mother and father's legal counsel, Robert said, documenting the discrepancy and requesting a full accounting. We'll simultaneously file the trust documentation with the appropriate estate authority establishing Alara's beneficial interest. The forensic audit will be shared with your own legal representatives. He paused. Given the amount involved and the nature of the discrepancy, it's possible, I want to be clear about this, that the matter could eventually involve legal proceedings. Fraud in estate matters is a serious thing. It is, Charles said. I want to repeat, I said, that I am not seeking anyone's imprisonment or destruction. I want the record corrected. I want the money my uncle is owed to be returned. I want grandmother's wishes honored. I looked at my mother. And I want an acknowledgement, a real one, not for the guests downstairs, not for anyone else, just in this room. My mother looked at me. Her face was doing something she couldn't control, something that looked from a certain angle like grief or shame, or perhaps the strange thing that happens when a person who has been very certain for a very long time becomes briefly uncertain, buys and glimpses in that gap all the things they might have done differently. Alara, she said. Her voice was lower than usual. The performance had gone out of it. Your grandmother. Grandmother saw me, I said. I know you didn't. I know you couldn't. I'm not angry about it anymore. I paused. But I'm not pretending it didn't happen. Not anymore. She looked away. My father put his head in his hands. My Uncle Charles folded the documents carefully. No, as if they were something he needed to take care of. I'll call my lawyer tonight, he said to Robert. I'll have everything couriered to him by morning, Robert said. The sounds of the wedding continued below us. The band was playing something brighter now, more danceable, the kind of song that makes people stand up. 3 floors down, my sister was probably dancing. She didn't know yet. She would know soon enough, not tonight, but soon. The way these things travel, way through whispers and calls and the gradual, unstoppable movement of truth through a family that had held it down for a very long time. I stood up from the table. I'm not staying for the dinner, I said. I don't think that's good for anyone. Where will you go? My uncle asked. I have a hotel suite already booked. Robert had seen to that in the 41 minutes. He was thorough. My grandmother had chosen him for a reason. Charles stood and crossed the room and put his arms around me, which he hadn't done since I was a child. He was stockier than I remembered, softer, and he smelled like the same cologne he'd always worn, something cedar and old-fashioned. I held on for a moment. She really chose you, he said quietly. She chose us, I said. She just put it in my hands. Stop. Share this if you've ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you, because part 6 is where the real consequences start. and where the healing begins. The first call I got the next morning was from Daniel, my new brother-in-law, Celeste's husband of 14 hours. He'd found my number. I'd never deleted myself from the family contact sheet, and he called at 7:53 in the morning before I'd had my first cup of coffee in the hotel suite that Robert's office had arranged, a suite on the 14th floor with tall windows and a view of the river going silver in the morning light. Ilara. He sounded young and frightened, which he was. 28, a good person by all accounts, an architect from a middle-class family who had met my sister at a gallery opening and been entirely overwhelmed by the Ashford coal machinery that had then processed him and approved him and made him part of the plan. "I'm so sorry about yesterday. What happened to you was... Celeste said it was complicated, but..." "It's all right, Daniel," I said. "She didn't know about the suitcase," he said quickly. "She knew there was going to be a conversation," she said, "but she didn't know." I let that sit for a moment. Celeste hadn't known about the suitcase. Perhaps. Or perhaps the detail was too ugly to own, and rewriting it as a surprise was the first move in a longer revision. I'd been watching my sister's relationship with the truth for 29 years. "I believe you, Daniel," I said, which was mostly true. "How is she?" A pause. There are a lot of calls happening. It's something about your grandmother's estate. Her mother is... There's a lot happening." "I know," I said. "It'll be clearer in a few days. The legal process takes time." Should Celeste..." "Let it settle," I said. "Tell her I don't want to fight. That's true. I'm not doing this to hurt her." I looked out at the river. "But what's coming is coming regardless. I didn't cause it. I just stopped pretending it wasn't there." He was quiet. "Take care of her," I said. "She's going to need someone steady." After I hung up, I sat with the coffee and the view and the strange new feeling of having no pretending left to do. It was disorienting, the way open space is disorienting after a long time in small rooms. My cheek still ached. My knee was properly bruised. I had one suitcase and the clothes I'd had on my body when I walked out of the Grand Bellevue, and $1.2 billion in a trust that would take several weeks to formally transfer into my active management. In the meantime, I had things to do. The formal letter from Hawthorne and Associates reached my parents' lawyer on Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I'd received a call from my mother's personal attorney, a smooth man named Garrison who specialized in exactly this kind of call, the call that's a warning dressed as curiosity. He asked if I was open to a family discussion before matters escalated. I said I was open to any conversation that included a full accounting of the discrepancy Charles's attorney was already reviewing. He said he'd be in touch. He did not call back. By Thursday, Charles had his own legal team in motion. The forensic audit findings were compelling. $11 million over 16 years is not an ambiguity or a misunderstanding. It is a pattern, and patterns leave traces. And the traces were all there in the records that Robert's forensic accountant had compiled with the same meticulous patience my grandmother had applied to everything she cared about. My mother called me on Friday. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was 4 minutes long. The first 2 minutes were composed, measured, reasonable sounding, the voice she used when she wanted something. She wanted to talk. She wanted to explain things. She wanted me to understand the full picture. In the third minute, the composure developed a crack, and I heard something I had almost never heard from my mother. Not anger, not command, but something plaintive, a note of genuine fear. In the fourth minute, she said, I know things have not always. Ilara, your grandmother loved you very much, but she didn't understand everything. She was an old woman, and she..." And then the message ended, mid-sentence, as if she'd heard herself and stopped. I sat with that voicemail for a long time. I played it twice. Then I didn't call back. Not yet. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I didn't know yet what I wanted to say, and I had promised myself, years ago, before any of this, that I would never say anything important to my mother that I hadn't thought about first. She had always relied on my impulse to respond, to smooth things over, to close the distance she created. I was no longer going to do that on her timeline. I would respond when I was ready. The story moved through the family's social circle with the velocity of something that had been compressed for a long time. I don't know who talked first. Probably one of the guests who'd seen the slap, who'd heard the suitcase, who'd noticed me leave and return and leave again. But within 10 days, the outline of it was circulating. Alara Ashford Cole had been struck and publicly disowned at her sister's wedding and had returned an hour later with a lawyer. And something significant was happening with the family's estate. The specific details, the trust, the $1.2 billion, the forensic audit, stayed private, contained within the legal process. But the fact of something was enough. In the social ecosystem my family inhabited, something is always enough. People began to recalibrate. The charity board my mother chaired started asking pointed questions about her schedule. The club membership that had been a source of my parents' social identity for 30 years became briefly uncomfortable, not overtly, but in the specific way that happens when the people around you are quietly reassessing. My sister called me 2 weeks after the wedding. She was in Bali, on her honeymoon. She'd found a moment alone, apparently. I could hear the ocean behind her, or what might have been ocean, the soft, blurred sound of it. Alara. Her voice was different from Daniel's. Careful rather than frightened. My sister was never frightened. She was strategic. Celeste, I said, I want you to know that what happened at the reception, I didn't know about the suitcase or I didn't know Mom was going to. You knew there was going to be a confrontation, I said. Gently but clearly. A pause. Things have been building for a long time. Yes, I said. They have. You've always been so separate, Alara. Even when we were growing up. You were always in your own world. I was separate, I said, because it was safer to be separate. You know that. You used it. Silence. I'm not calling to fight, she said finally. Neither am I. What do you want from all this? I thought about how to answer that. What did I want? I wanted the earrings that were supposed to be mine. I wanted my Uncle Charles to be made whole. I wanted the record to be true. I wanted to stop carrying the weight of a family that had handed me their shame to hold and never acknowledged it. I want things to be accurate, I said, legally and personally. That's all. That's all. She said it like it was enormous, which it was. Accuracy in a family built on careful fictions is a seismic thing. Celeste, I paused. I don't hate you. I want you to know that. I don't have the energy for it, and it wouldn't help either of us. But I'm not going to keep performing a version of this family that doesn't exist. That's over. She didn't say anything for a long time. The ocean behind her kept going, indifferent. Okay, she said finally. Just that. We hung up. I started seeing a therapist in April, 6 weeks after the wedding. Her name was Dr. Frances Josh, and she came recommended by my accountant's wife, which is a thoroughly unglamorous way to find someone who turns out to be important to you. She was 50, precise, thoughtful, with a quality of attention that felt unusual in a world where most attention is divided. She didn't treat me like I was fragile or victimized or dramatic. She treated me like an intelligent person working through something complicated, which was exactly what I needed. I told her about the wedding, the suitcase, the slap, the card. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. What's the story you've been telling yourself about why your family treated you this way? She asked. I thought about it. That I wasn't useful enough. That I was the wrong kind of daughter. That I was too quiet or too separate or not enough of whatever they needed me to be. And what do you think now? I looked at the window of her office. Outside, Boston was doing its May thing, erratic, briefly warm, still negotiating. I think I was actually too visible to them. Too much the thing they hadn't made, that they hadn't shaped. My grandmother saw something in me they couldn't see because they'd decided what I was before they looked. Dr. Josh wrote something down. Families do that, she said. Assign roles, early and completely. What's hard about inheriting a grandmother's vision of you rather than your parents'? I thought about it for a long time. It means I have to decide which one is true, or if either of them is. It means I have to figure out who I am without anyone else's story. Does that feel frightening? Yes, I said. And also, like something I've been waiting to do for a very long time. I did not go back to my parents' house. I had my own apartment. I'd kept it through all of this, a good decision made by some instinct that had understood, even when I hadn't, that I needed my own ground. The apartment was mine, paid for with the money from my own accounting practice, which had been growing quietly and steadily for 7 years into something real. 4 associates, a client list that included several small businesses and 2 mid-size nonprofits, work I was good at and that I'd built without anyone's help. The trust was a different thing. $1.2 billion is not, in the immediate term, a change to daily life in the way people imagine. It's a responsibility. It's a structure. It's something that has to be understood and managed and stewarded, exactly the way my grandmother had described. I spent the first 3 months reading, meeting with Robert's team, learning the portfolio, the real estate, the equity positions, the bonds, and understanding what my grandmother had built and why. It was the most interesting work I had ever done. There were 7 private companies in the portfolio. 6 were profitable and stable. 1, a logistics firm in Ohio, was underperforming in ways that the current management team seemed unwilling to address clearly. I requested a full operational review. When the results came back, I sat with them for a week and then recommended changes that the board, once they understood what they were dealing with, implemented. 3 months later, the firm's margins had improved by 14%. I'm not telling this to impress anyone. I'm telling it because my grandmother had known, when she watched me in her kitchen at age 9, that this was the work I was built for. Not visibility, not performance, attention, precision, the patient work of understanding systems and keeping them honest. I was 34 years old, and for the first time I was doing exactly the thing I was made to do. The legal matter with my parents resolved over approximately 8 months. Charles's attorneys and my parents' attorneys reached a settlement, an acknowledgement of the discrepancy and a payment schedule for the $11 million. My mother was not charged criminally. Charles chose not to pursue that, and I supported his choice. He said over coffee on a Tuesday afternoon in his kitchen in Wellesley that he'd rather have the money and the truth than a court case that would consume years and leave everyone ruined. Your grandmother would have agreed, I said. Your grandmother, he said, was a remarkable woman who I'm now slightly afraid I underestimated. She was used to that, I said. He smiled. It was a sad smile and a real one. My mother sent me a letter in September. Not an email. A letter handwritten, 4 pages, in the handwriting that I recognized from birthday cards and grocery lists and the occasional formal note from my childhood. She wrote about her own childhood, about Eleanor. It's about what it had felt like to be Eleanor's daughter rather than Eleanor's chosen one. She wrote about decisions she'd made that she framed as protecting the family, but that she admitted, reading through them again on the page, had been about control. She wrote about the slap. She wrote, I have no excuse for that. I had no excuse at the time. I knew the moment my hand moved that I had done something I could not take back. I wanted you gone, and I chose the most violent version of that want, and I have thought about it every day since. She did not ask me to forgive her. She asked, in the final paragraph, if I would consider having coffee sometime. Not to undo anything, just to see if there was something left that was worth keeping. I read the letter 3 times. Then I called Dr. Josh. She wrote me a letter, I said. How does that feel? Complicated, I said. Like the beginning of something or the middle of something or maybe just a sentence that doesn't connect to a story yet. You don't have to know which one it is, Dr. Josh said. You can just hold it for now. I held it. The earrings came back to me in October. My mother sent them in a small padded envelope with no note inside. Just the earrings, pale gold, the small oval settings with the seed pearls, the ones I had watched on my grandmother's ears at every important event of my childhood, the ones pressed into a clause of a handwritten document in a safe in a Victorian building on Marlborough Street. I held them in my palm for a long time. I thought about Eleanor in her kitchen, hands around a teacup, watching me with those gray, evaluating eyes. I thought about the card, the silver titanium card that had sat in my wallet for 11 years, that I had almost thrown away so many times, that I had kept because some part of me had trusted my grandmother's certainty even when I couldn't access my own. For emergencies. I thought about what an emergency really is, not just danger, but a moment when the true shape of things becomes visible. A suitcase on a marble floor, a slap that cleared something away instead of just hurting. 300 witnesses to a moment that had been building for 30 years, who had watched a woman be handed a carry-on bag and her exile, and who had then watched her stand up, smooth her dress, and walk out in a way that was the opposite of defeat. I put the earrings on. I looked in the mirror. They were right on me. That was the thing I hadn't expected. Not just that they were beautiful or that they were mine by my grandmother's instruction, but that they were right, that they belonged the way few things feel like they belong, in that specific way that announces, this is where this thing was always going to end up. I thought, Eleanor, you knew. People ask, they will ask you if you've ever been through something like this, what it feels like on the other side, what winning feels like, or justice, or whatever word you want to use. I want to be honest about what it feels like. It doesn't feel like triumph, not the way you might imagine, not like a movie moment with music and light and the clean satisfaction of wrong things made right. It feels quieter than that. It feels like a long exhale. It feels like putting down something heavy that you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten the weight of it, and then spending months slowly realizing how tired you are from the carrying, and slowly, incrementally, untired. It feels like standing on the balcony of my apartment on a November evening with a glass of wine and the city lights doing what they do, making ordinary things beautiful by virtue of distance and darkness, and realizing that you're not waiting for anything. Not waiting to be recognized, not waiting for the next disappointment, not waiting for the next performance, just standing there. My grandmother had known that this was what I needed. Not the money. The money was real and significant, and it changed the practical fabric of my life in ways that mattered. But money was not the point, and had never been the point. The point was the truth of it. The point was the document that said, I see you in my grandmother's own handwriting, uncertified and notarized and held safe for 30 years against exactly this moment. The point was that she had known who I was before I knew it myself, and she had waited, and she had trusted me to find my way to the right moment, and she had been right. I had coffee with my mother for the first time in January, 14 months after the wedding. We met at a small cafe near her new apartment. She and my father had quietly moved to something smaller, a shift that spoke its own language about changed circumstances and changed expectations. She arrived before me. She was wearing less jewelry than usual. Her hair was not from Paris. She looked older than I expected, which was the honest truth and not an unkind observation. She looked like the work of 14 months was visible in her face. She looked briefly like someone I recognized from before the armor went on. We sat for 2 hours. We did not resolve anything or undo anything or agree on a narrative. We talked about Eleanor. We talked about what it had been like to be Eleanor's daughter and what it had been like to be Eleanor's granddaughter, and what the difference between those two experiences said about the spaces we'd each been assigned to occupy in the family story. My mother cried once quietly over her second coffee. I didn't, but I wasn't unmoved. I don't know if I can fix this, she said. It was the most honest thing I'd ever heard her say. I don't know either, I said, but I'm willing to see. That's not a happy ending. I want to be clear about that. It's not a resolution or a reconciliation or a clean line between before and after. It's an opening, a possibility, a door left slightly ajar. That's actually how real things work. The clean endings are for stories that aren't true yet. I'm writing this from my apartment. Oh, it's a Tuesday evening in March, almost exactly a year since the wedding, since the suitcase, since everything. The city is doing what it does from the 14th floor, making itself legible in a way it never is from street level, the lights and the distance turning it into something you can almost understand. I have a glass of wine. The earrings are on because I wear them often now, not because they're valuable, though they are, but because of what they mean to have on. They're a specific weight in my ears, a small, familiar presence. My accounting practice has grown. I've brought on 2 more associates and moved to larger offices. The trust portfolio is in good shape. The logistics firm in Ohio turned its 3rd consecutive profitable quarter last month. Charles and I have lunch every few weeks. He's started a small foundation, and I'm involved in the financial structure of it. And there's something satisfying about that I don't entirely have words for. The way real reparation works, not as performance but as ongoing practice. Daniel and Celeste had a daughter in December. Her name is Alma, which is a beautiful name. I sent a gift. I have not met her yet. That door is ajar too. Dr. Josh asked me recently what the last year had taught me. I thought about it for a long time, which she's used to. That the things that protect us and the things that hurt us are often the same things, I said. Staying quiet protected me for 30 years and also cost me something real. Leaving that ballroom looked like defeat to everyone watching and was actually the beginning of everything. The card in my wallet looked like nothing for 11 years and contained everything. I paused. And that my grandmother, who everyone in that family underestimated in different ways, knew exactly what she was doing the whole time. What did she know? Dr. Josh asked. I thought about 9-year-old Alara in a kitchen, sitting down beside an old woman because a housekeeper was sad and no one had said anything to her. I thought about the gray eyes softening. She knew that the people who notice the things no one else notices, the people who are paying attention even when it's not dramatic, even when there's no audience, those are the people worth trusting, I said. She knew I'd wait. She knew I'd be patient. She knew I wouldn't use what she gave me to destroy anyone. I paused. She knew I was ready before I did. The city glitters. The wine is half finished. My cheek healed months ago without a mark. The body is better at forgetting than the mind, which is sometimes a mercy. I am 35 years old and I am, for the first time, exactly myself. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was never the money. It was this, standing in my own life, on ground that can't be taken from me, not because my grandmother protected it legally, though she did, but because I finally stopped giving anyone else the power to tell me who I was. That's the real inheritance, the one that fits in no briefcase and no will. The one she pressed into my palm in the white room with the roses that I carried for 11 years without knowing its shape, that I finally held up to the light in the moment when everything fell apart and understood. It was never the card. It was the woman who gave it to me, and the woman who was ready, finally, to use it. If this story spoke to you, share it. You never know who else is carrying something in their wallet, waiting for their moment to stand up.